They cut her mic, live, in front of hundreds of executives, because the idea she was about to claim wasn't just brilliant, it was hers. And the thought of a black woman owning the most valuable algorithm in the company's history was too threatening for them to let her speak. No malfunction, no accident, just a calculated move to erase her from her own success. The man who silenced her smiled, took her words, and sold them as his own while the room applauded like nothing had happened. But what if the woman they dismissed wasn't just another name on the project? What if she was the legal owner of everything they built, and had been watching, recording, and preparing from the moment they tried to bury her voice? Where are you watching from right now? And which part of this story do you feel the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you're ready for more stories that call out injustice and flip the script, hit like, comment, and subscribe. We're just getting started. It began, as these things often do, in a room full of polished wood and polished people, where voices echoed louder the closer they came to sounding the same. Alicia Monroe sat quietly at the edge of the long, gleaming conference table, her fingers resting on a notepad that held more than just ideas. It held breakthroughs, algorithms that could revolutionize real-time voice processing, code she had spent 14 months perfecting. But as the meeting began and the product team gathered, she was barely acknowledged. "Let's keep this tight," said Brad Thompson, head of development, with his usual slick charm and a dismissive wave that swept past Alicia like she was a ghost in the room. Brad was all sharp suits and sharper smiles, the kind of man who knew how to play the game and play it loud. Alicia, on the other hand, was soft-spoken, methodical, and let her work do the talking, which, in this company, meant she was often unheard. As the room settled, Brad clicked a button on his laptop, and the big screen lit up. Alicia's architecture, the modular neural threading system, appeared on the screen. But there was no mention of her. No name. No credit. "Today, I want to walk you through a new predictive model we've developed," Brad said. "It's capable of anticipating user behavior at an 86% success rate. Revolutionary stuff." Alicia blinked. Her chest tightened. That number, that phrasing, word for word from the report she had sent him privately last month, marked confidential, draft in progress. Her throat tightened, but she said nothing. Not yet. She waited, hoping, foolishly, that at some point he'd gesture to her and say this was Alicia's brainchild. But the gesture never came. Instead, he fielded questions like a magician unveiling a trick, grinning, spinning, captivating. "What inspired the data filtration layer?" one of the VPs asked. "Oh, we just noticed patterns," Brad shrugged, as if discovery came to him in dreams. Across the table, Alicia's gaze dropped to her notes. Her own handwriting now felt like whispers from a stolen soul. After the meeting, she followed Brad out into the hallway, her voice low but insistent. "Why didn't you mention I worked on the architecture?" she asked. Brad barely paused. "You're part of the team," he said smoothly. "We all own it, right?" He didn't wait for a response. He was already turning the corner, already done with the conversation. Alicia stood still for a moment, the fluorescent lights above suddenly too bright. It wasn't just the dismissal. It was the routine of it, the familiarity, the way her work always seemed to become less hers once it got too good. Later that afternoon, she received an invite to a second meeting, this time a strategic briefing for the company's board. Her pulse quickened. Maybe this was it. Maybe someone had noticed. But when she opened the attachment, her name wasn't on the presentation. Again, Brad was listed as lead innovator. Alicia was nowhere, not even in the footnotes. The loop was starting, the setup, the slow dance of erasure. She went to her manager, a man named Derek who wore his discomfort with race and confrontation like cologne, overpowering and suffocating. "I need to talk about the voice project," she said. "I think there's been a serious oversight." Derek leaned back, arms crossed. "Alicia, I hear you. But Brad's really running point on that right now. We need to present a unified voice to the board. It's nothing personal." He smiled, the kind of smile that told you it was very much personal. "Why don't you keep refining the back end? That's where your strengths are anyway." Alicia stared at him, her jaw tight. She had led the back end and the front end. She had written the framework they were calling revolutionary. And yet here she was, being told to stick to the shadows. She walked out of the office with her head held high, but inside, a storm was beginning to brew. One that had been building for years, through internships where she was mistaken for the admin assistant, through job interviews where people loved her energy but passed anyway, through promotions that never quite landed in her inbox. That evening, Alicia stayed late. She pulled up every log, every commit, every design note tied to her name. She wasn't going to fight this with anger. She was going to fight it with facts. But as she stared at the screen, a deeper truth hit her. They didn't care about proof. They cared about power. And for now, Brad had it. But what Brad didn't know, what no one in that company knew, was that Alicia had been documenting everything. The paper trail, the emails, the dates, even her own private IP filings. She had her own game. And it had just begun. The morning after the boardroom betrayal, Alicia arrived early, her laptop already humming as she sipped a too-hot coffee that did little to calm the storm inside her. She was determined to stay ahead of whatever move Brad and his inner circle made next. Her terminal blinked to life, and she opened her calendar, searching for the invite to the Executive Strategy Summit, a quarterly event where only key contributors presented their tech forecasts to the executive team. She scrolled once, then twice. Nothing. No invite. No mention. Her breath caught for a moment, but she told herself it had to be a mistake. Maybe IT had a glitch. Maybe the email was buried. So she opened the internal scheduling system, checking the attendees list. Her heart sank. Brad was listed as Chief Technical Representative. Below him were two junior devs, both of whom had only recently joined the project. Both white, both favored by Brad. Alicia's name wasn't there. Not as contributor. Not even as an attendee. She leaned back, stunned. Just 2 weeks ago, she was drafting the presentation for this exact meeting. She had run simulations to project market scalability. She had stayed after hours, tuning the neural response patterns for the algorithm's decision tree. This wasn't an oversight. This was a lockout. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she searched internal logs. What she found confirmed her worst suspicion: an email chain between Brad and the executive assistant, requesting Alicia's removal from the invite list. The rationale: we'll keep this to core presenters. Alicia is better utilized in a support capacity. That last phrase felt like acid. Better utilized. As if she were a utility, a resource, something to be allocated, not acknowledged. Her face tightened. She printed the email chain and slid it into a growing folder on her desk. Quiet documentation. Later that morning, Derek called her into his office. His tone was falsely warm, like a worn-out sitcom dad pretending everything was fine. "Just wanted to touch base," he said, gesturing to the seat across from his cluttered desk. Alicia sat, arms crossed gently over her lap. "I noticed you've been looping into a lot of the higher-level planning lately," he began, not quite meeting her eyes. "And that's great, really. But I think we need to start shifting some responsibilities." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Shifting how?" she asked, voice neutral. "We want you focused on infrastructure stabilization, logistics, deployment timelines," Derek said, nodding as if it were a promotion instead of a downgrade. "Let's keep you out of the brainstorming huddles for now. Let the design guys lead that. You're detail-oriented. That's your strength." Alicia said nothing for a long beat. "You mean take me off the design team?" she finally replied. Derek winced, but nodded. "Temporarily," he lied. "It's about bandwidth. We can't have too many cooks in the kitchen. You understand." She understood all too well. This was intellectual sidelining, creative erasure disguised as strategic realignment. And it wasn't new. It was polished discrimination dressed up in corporate jargon. Alicia's gaze stayed steady. "So, Brad will be leading design solo?" she asked. "And the new guys?" Derek nodded. "They bring a fresh perspective. Plus, they vibe with Brad. You know how important team chemistry is." She stared at him, not blinking. "What about my patents tied to the project?" she asked quietly. Derek hesitated, visibly flustered. "Let's not get legalistic, Alicia. This isn't that kind of conversation." But it was. It always was. Back at her desk, Alicia opened her design repository. Access denied. Her permissions had been quietly revoked. She checked the development Slack. No mentions, no pings, like she had vanished. Her direct reports had stopped copying her into technical chains. She was being erased in real time, her brilliance repackaged under someone else's name. That afternoon, during a routine team huddle in the open workspace, Brad stood by the digital board, laying out upcoming tasks. Deployment leads will be Alicia, he said without looking at her. We need tight tracking on back-end QA and rollout documentation. Let's keep her focused on the deliverables. The team nodded, some uncomfortably. No one objected. Alicia scribbled nothing in her notepad. She didn't need reminders of what she already knew too well. Brad didn't just want her out of creative leadership. He wanted her quiet, visible only when convenient. In the elevator later that day, one of the junior engineers approached her hesitantly. "Hey, I thought you were presenting with Brad next week," he said, eyes scanning her face. "That architecture, it was yours, right?" Alicia offered a small, practiced smile. "Apparently. I'm better utilized elsewhere," she replied. The junior blinked, nodded awkwardly, and stepped off at his floor. She stayed in the elevator, letting the doors close again, letting the silence stretch. At home, Alicia laid out every printed email, every access change notification, every project commit with her initials scrubbed or replaced. She wasn't just collecting evidence, she was building a case. She wasn't sure yet if it would be legal, public, or private, but she knew it would be devastating. And she wouldn't just prove she was the architect. She would prove they knew she was, and chose to silence her anyway. The next morning, Alicia wore navy slacks and a graphite blouse. Her look was clean, deliberate, the kind that radiated control. When she walked past Brad in the hallway, he gave her a polite nod, like nothing had changed. She smiled back, even as her hand held a USB drive tightly in her pocket, one that contained encrypted backups of her entire design path. Brad didn't know she had it. No one did. Not yet. But soon, they'd all realize that while they were playing politics, Alicia was laying foundations. Not just code, power. The launch event was set to be the company's biggest moment of the year, a high-profile showcase streamed live to investors, press, and clients across 4 continents, and Alicia, despite being pushed into the shadows over the past few weeks, had still prepared the back-end fail-safe protocols, ensured the algorithm was stable, and double-checked the predictive model's live performance metrics just hours before go time. She hadn't been invited to rehearse on stage nor listed as a keynote speaker, but her badge still gave her technical access. So she took her seat in the 3rd row behind the executive chairs, watching as a giant LED screen flickered to life, with the company's logo glowing bold and self-important against a galaxy blue backdrop. Brad, of course, took the stage first, wearing a crisp blazer and his signature smirk, flanked by junior engineers who were clearly out of their depth, but clung to his every cue like eager apprentices learning from a modern-day oracle. "Welcome," he beamed, the spotlight catching the sheen of his cufflinks, "to the future of intuitive AI, crafted here by the best minds in the world." Alicia felt her stomach tighten as he launched into a breakdown of features she had personally designed, describing them in sweeping, self-congratulatory terms that made her code sound like a gift from Olympus. When the demo segment arrived, Brad waved his hand theatrically. "And now let's see it in action," he said, glancing at the tech crew near the stage. The live model kicked in. The interface responded smoothly. As the room erupted in applause, Alicia knew she couldn't sit in silence any longer. She stood, stepped forward to the mic station positioned discreetly near the front row, technically for guest commentary, and calmly said into the mic, "I'd like to add a brief comment about the algorithm design." Her voice carried for a half second, clear and poised, but then static. Silence. The mic had been cut. She blinked, confused, tapping it gently. Still dead. Up on stage, Brad didn't miss a beat. He looked directly at her, then at the audience, and smiled. A slow, deliberate, knowing smirk. Then, almost theatrically, he turned back to the audience. "Tech hiccup," he said with a chuckle, "but we've debugged bigger things, haven't we?" The audience laughed politely. Alicia's hands tightened at her sides. A technician nearby gave her a helpless shrug. Whether he'd muted her or someone higher up had given the order, the message was loud and clear. She was to be seen, not heard. Moments later, the CEO himself took the stage. Jonathan Myers, the silver-haired executive with a voice like buttered bourbon and the presence of a man too used to controlling rooms, stepped forward to thunderous applause. "I just want to take a moment," he said, beaming, "to thank the brilliant team behind this project. We're talking about real innovation here. Not just code, but vision." He paused, letting the praise hang like perfume in the air. "I'm proud of our global team of engineers," he continued, "from the heart of Silicon Valley to, well, the rest of the world." A chuckle rippled through the auditorium. A few investors near the front row actually slapped their knees in laughter. Alicia remained still, her eyes locked on the man, her expression unreadable. Everyone around her laughed. Everyone except her. The room moved on, oblivious to the weight of that moment, but Alicia could feel it like a blade between her ribs. The way they all laughed at a joke designed to exclude. The subtle dig buried beneath faux praise. The insinuation that some people, some places, some types of contributors didn't belong in the room of innovators. She knew what they meant. They always meant the same thing. As the event wound down, Brad returned to the stage to take press questions. When one journalist asked about the ethical development of AI and the diversity of thought in the process, Brad smiled his practice smile. "Diversity is key," he said, gesturing broadly. "We had all kinds of voices involved, from data scientists to field testers. We don't just build for the world, we build with it." Alicia's jaw clenched. No one questioned him. No one asked for names. Because no one really cared. So long as the man with the mic told a good story. Backstage, after the event, Alicia waited. She had nothing left to say in that room full of illusion, but she needed one final glance at the expressions behind the performance. Brad walked past her with two junior engineers in tow, laughing about an upcoming podcast interview he had booked. "We nailed it," he said. Even the investor from Zurich was impressed. Said the interface felt elegant and masculine. The juniors laughed, too eager to fit in to question the casual sexism wrapped in faux praise. Jonathan passed next, trailed by a PR handler and a coffee in a glass mug. When he saw Alicia, he gave her a nod that tried to mimic warmth, but didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good to see you, Alicia," he said. "Hope you're enjoying the show." Then he disappeared down the corridor without waiting for her reply. As she walked back through the side hallway, Alicia paused outside the media control room, where a wall of screens showed various camera angles from the live broadcast. One showed her standing at the mic, muted, expression calm. The feed had cut to a wide shot seconds later, erasing her presence. Just like the emails, just like the calendar, just like the code. She stared at the footage, her reflection layered over the image of her own silencing. In that moment, something inside her shifted. Not rage, not grief, but a cold, measured certainty. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was systemic. This was habitual. And the world needed to see it for what it was. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small black device, a portable drive, and tucked it beneath her jacket. It held the original source code, her code. And soon, it would become more than just evidence. 2 days after the product launch, Alicia received an innocuous-looking calendar invite titled Touchbase, Career Development Feedback from HR. It was scheduled for 10:30 a.m. in room 4B, the one with frosted glass walls and a perpetually humming overhead light that made every conversation inside feel more like interrogation than dialogue. She knew what it meant. No one got an unscheduled one-on-one with HR unless a message was being sent. She walked in on time, shoulders straight, face unreadable. Sitting across the table was Denise Carr, senior people strategist, who smiled with too many teeth and an open laptop that had Alicia's employee profile already pulled up. "Hi, Alicia," Denise said in that polished, calibrated tone HR professionals mastered after years of rehearsing fake neutrality. "Thanks for coming in on short notice. We just wanted to check in after the launch. We've heard a few things and thought it would be good to align." Alicia nodded once, silent, waiting. "We understand you've raised some concerns," Denise continued. her fingers lightly tapping the keys as she spoke about collaboration recognition, project access, visibility. She said the words as if reading symptoms from a script, and not describing a systemic pattern of intellectual theft and silencing. "We want to be sure you're feeling supported," she added with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Alicia's reply was simple, steady. "I've contributed to critical innovations and have not received proper attribution. That's not a concern. That's a fact." Denise's smile didn't falter, but the air in the room seemed to tighten. "I appreciate your clarity," she said, "but I also want to gently highlight something that's come up in some of your 360 feedback." Alicia waited. Denise clicked something on her laptop. "There have been remarks, anonymous of course, about difficulty in team cohesion. Some teammates feel there's been a breakdown in communication, a perception of, let's say, intensity." Alicia raised one eyebrow, slowly. "You're saying I'm being labeled difficult?" Denise offered an apologetic shrug. "Not at all. Just that sometimes, when concerns are raised repeatedly, it can impact how someone's adaptability is viewed, especially in leadership tracks. We're a collaborative culture here, and cohesion is important." The message was clear. Keep quiet or be cast as the problem. Ask for credit and risk being painted as uncooperative. She was being warned. But Alicia only smiled coolly and said, "Noted." As she left the glass room, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew that every word she'd spoken had already been reduced to keywords in a report. Tone. Friction. Not aligned. They were preparing to protect themselves, not her. Back at her desk, Alicia noticed the atmosphere had shifted. People no longer made direct eye contact. Conversations dimmed when she walked past. In particular, Nathan, a white software architect she had mentored during his onboarding a year ago, someone who used to bring her coffee unasked and quote her ideas in meetings with pride, now sat 3 desks away and hadn't acknowledged her presence in days. That morning, she passed him on her way to the espresso machine. "Morning, Nate," she said, voice calm but inviting. He glanced up briefly, muttered something that sounded like, "Hey," then turned sharply back to his monitor. The moment hung in the air for a second too long. It wasn't personal. It was self-preservation. Alicia had become radioactive. Speaking to her might flag you as an ally in HR's mental dossier of dissenters. And Nathan, with a fast-track promotion clearly brewing, wasn't going to risk proximity to her fallout. In the lunchroom, she overheard 2 associates whispering near the fridge. "I mean, it's complicated," one murmured. "She's smart, yeah, but she's always fighting something. It's exhausting." The other replied, "Brad's been here longer. He knows how to play the game." Alicia stood by the coffee pot, invisible and yet central to the conversation. She said nothing, just poured her drink, then returned to her desk, her spine straight as glass. That afternoon, she received a forwarded email chain that had somehow reached her from an anonymous sender, likely someone still sympathetic in silence. It included a Slack message from Brad to a senior VP. "If we keep giving her rope, she's going to hang the whole project. Might be time to reassign." The VP's reply? A thumbs up emoji. She printed it, added it to the folder. The next day, her access to the voice learning sandbox, code she had designed from the ground up, was revoked. Security protocol update, IT had claimed. She didn't even bother replying. She knew what it was. This wasn't just silencing anymore. It was a slow erasure. At a company-wide town hall the following week, where employees were encouraged to submit anonymous questions, someone, perhaps bold, perhaps reckless, asked, "What are we doing to ensure that women of color receive proper recognition in product development?" The CEO laughed. "That's a great question," he said, not bothering to actually answer it. "Diversity is in our DNA." The room chuckled. Alicia sat in the back row, her arms folded. No one turned to look at her, not even once. And still, she worked. Quietly, meticulously. Every night, she copied files. Not company data. Her own notes, sketches, proof of authorship, proof of omission. She stored it all on an encrypted drive that only she could access. Her archive grew, and with it her resolve. One evening, as she left the building, the janitor, An older man named Luis, who had always smiled at her warmly, nodded and said, "You okay, Mija?" Alicia paused, looked him in the eye, and said, "I will be." He nodded, satisfied with her answer, and went back to buffing the floors. Across the street, inside a sushi bar where she often went to think, Alicia opened her notebook and stared at the sketch of the original algorithm, the one that started it all. She tapped her pen, her thoughts moving faster now, not just with anger, but with precision, because something had shifted. Not in them, in her. They thought they were silencing her, but in reality, they were. The announcement came one rainy Thursday morning, cloaked in the self-congratulatory buzz of a company-wide email with a subject line that read, "Historic milestone strategic licensing deal confirmed." Alicia opened it not out of curiosity, but out of necessity. By now she had trained herself to treat every internal update as evidence. As the email loaded, her eyes scanned the bolded first line. "We are thrilled to share that Monroe Tech has entered into an exclusive licensing agreement with global innovation powerhouse Virexin Labs, securing a projected valuation of $180 million for our proprietary neural voice prediction algorithm." The word Monroe Tech twisted something sharp inside her. It bore her name, albeit coincidentally with the company, but carried none of her legacy. The email continued with a bullet point breakdown of the deal scope, monetization plan, and IP transfer structure. There was no mention of Alicia. Again, only Brad, whose name appeared 5 times in the short statement, always framed as the visionary who led the breakthrough. She sat motionless in her chair as her inbox pinged with forwarded versions of the announcement from former classmates, colleagues, and even her mentor from graduate school, all congratulating her, assuming she had been part of the core team, assuming she had finally received the recognition she deserved. She responded to none of them. Later that afternoon, Brad held a press conference in the company's event atrium, a converted warehouse dressed in LED brilliance and stage lighting. Rows of white chairs were filled with investors, tech bloggers, analysts, and media personnel flown in from both coasts. Alicia stood at the back near the audio technician's booth, her badge still functional, her presence unnoticed. Brad took the stage in a tailored charcoal suit and a surgically perfected smile. Today, he began, we don't just celebrate a partnership, we celebrate what happens when vision meets execution. The crowd applauded. Behind him, the massive screen displayed animated mock-ups of the algorithm's commercial applications. Voice-guided healthcare diagnostics, smart learning assistants, multilingual customer support bots. All built on the architecture Alicia had designed and tested alone during the first 6 months of the project, when Brad hadn't even known what a neural prediction matrix was. When the Q&A began, Alicia watched as a sharp-jawed reporter from TechPulse stood and raised a mic. "Brad," the woman asked, "can you speak a little more to the origin story of this technology? The IP, the inspiration, where did the seed of the idea really come from?" Brad smiled wider, his eyes glinting. "Great question," he said. "Look, sometimes genius doesn't follow a straight line. Sometimes it sparks out of spontaneous collaboration, out of hallway brainstorms, napkin sketches during late-night pizza runs." The audience laughed politely. "There's no single origin," he added. "It's the magic of a well-synced team. And I've been blessed with one of the best." Alicia's jaw tensed. She knew that line. She had heard versions of it in every boardroom that couldn't name the black woman behind the patent. It was the script they all used. Blur the lines, make it collective, make it vague enough that no one could ask the real questions. As the press conference wrapped, Brad posed for photos beside a giant poster of the algorithm diagram. Ironically, a screenshot of the interface Alicia had personally styled. She turned and exited before the cameras could capture her face. That evening, the news hit every major tech outlet. Monroe Tech sells Future of Voice to Virexin Labs. The headlines read, "Brad Thompson leads AI revolution worth $180 million. TechPod's newsletter sent out a special edition with the subject, "The Man Behind the Code." Alicia sat at her kitchen table, a plate of untouched food beside her, the glow from her laptop reflecting off the folder of printouts she'd accumulated over the last few months. The folder was thick now: screenshots, time-stamped emails, project metadata, Slack exchanges, HR transcripts. It was, on its own, a testament. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. The next day, she walked into the office and noticed the subtle shift in people's behavior. Brad strutted through the halls like a crowned CEO, nodding to interns and bumping fists with directors who suddenly acted as if they'd always believed in him. Posters bearing the Virexin logo were already being mounted across the workspace. A new initiative had been launched, Project Polaris, the commercialization pipeline to accelerate productization across sectors. And Alicia had been assigned a technical support consultant role on Polaris, unironically labeled an honor in her task briefing. She stared at the task list and saw that her only role was QA documentation verification and deployment regression logging. They were done hiding it. They were actively rewriting her history in real time. That afternoon, during a hallway conversation near the break room, she overheard Brad talking to a board advisor. "We're going to turn this into a legacy play," he said. "Make Monroe Tech synonymous with ethical intelligence, diversity, innovation, cross-continental harmony. You know the drill." The advisor laughed. "And the code?" he asked. "We've hardened it. We're ready for global deployment," Brad replied. "It's airtight." Alicia walked past them, not slowing, not flinching, though she knew the line he had just uttered was a lie. The code had flaws, subtle, dangerous ones, introduced after they had removed her from the testing environment. But she had proof, and if they launched it globally, those flaws would not go unnoticed. That evening, Alicia sat alone in a co-working space 2 blocks from HQ, where no one would look for her. She logged into an anonymized account and began uploading key excerpts from her documentation archive into a secure, encrypted vault, time-stamped, watermarked, linked to her original commits on GitChain. It wasn't public, not yet, but the moment was coming, because Brad might have the cameras, but she had the code. The pressure became unbearable not because Alicia was cracking under it, but because the walls were being deliberately tightened. The oxygen of choice removed one option at a time, and after watching Brad parade the algorithm to every media outlet and treat her work like a crown he forged in fire rather than something he stole in silence, Alicia did what any rational person with dignity would do. She formally requested removal from the Polaris Deployment Initiative, submitting a signed withdrawal letter directly to her project manager, time-stamped and CC'd to both HR and legal, with the subject line, "Formal disassociation from voice prediction licensing and commercial rollout." She followed it with an in-person meeting, short and sharp, where she sat across from the same HR strategist who had once warned her about team cohesion and said simply, "I want no further connection to Polaris. I will not validate it with my presence." Denise had nodded vaguely, tapped her keyboard without saying much, and told Alicia they'd process everything accordingly. Alicia left the office that day with a strange sense of relief, as if cutting ties, even unofficially, was the first real breath she'd taken in weeks. But that feeling didn't last, because when she returned to her workstation 2 days later, her company dashboard still showed her profile listed under the Polaris project, tagged as lead systems engineer and marked active. And when she submitted an internal ticket to correct the status, she received a reply from the engineering coordinator saying, "Hi Alicia, thanks for the note. We haven't seen a formal project release from HR yet. Until we do, your name is required for continuity purposes. Let me know if you have any questions." Her jaw clenched. She had more than questions. She had a copy of the withdrawal letter and a digital red receipt proving it had been opened. Alicia went to HR again, this time with printouts, receipts, and the quiet storm in her voice. Denise greeted her with the same plastic smile and said, "Ah, Alicia, thanks for stopping by. Yes, I saw your request. The issue is, well, things move slowly when legal language is involved. And since your name is on so much of the original architecture, technically you're still considered integral to the project's intellectual foundation. Until the paperwork is formally transitioned, removing you might cause issues with external verification audits." Alicia didn't blink. "So let me understand this clearly," she said, voice like a knife hidden under silk. "I'm not allowed to participate. But I'm not allowed to leave either. Denise folded her hands and offered a non-answer wrapped in legalese. We're in a complex position. It's just about optics. Back at her desk, Alicia refreshed the system portal again. Her name still there, the lie preserved in data. It wasn't just about trapping her, it was about co-opting her legacy while excluding her from authorship. She realized then what they were doing. Her name legitimized the code. Her identity as a black female engineer added weight to their DEI compliance claims. And if she left publicly, the optics would collapse. She had become the perfect ghost, visible only when useful, erased the moment she tried to speak. That night, Alicia stayed in the office well past midnight, combing through the company's internal IP registry, cross-referencing version history logs and asset submissions. The folder names were sterile numbers and initials, but one caught her attention: MPALCVTXAI Prot. It matched the architecture she had submitted 8 months earlier, before Brad had even joined the team full-time. She clicked through and found a metadata trail leading to a secure patent draft. It wasn't yet filed. No legal registration, no submission number. Just a digital placeholder marked under review. She blinked at the document properties. Last edited 3 days ago. Editor, brad.t@monroetech.ai. She checked the ownership field. Status, pending transfer. Her hands trembled, not from shock, but from rage tempered by exhaustion. They hadn't even filed it yet. They were preparing to, which meant they were stalling her release until the paperwork could be reshuffled, until they could scrub the chain of custody and rename the creator. But when she cross-searched external public patent logs just to confirm, she discovered something even more chilling. One submission had been filed. Not under Monroe Tech, not under Brad, but under her name, Alicia Monroe, filed from an anonymized legal proxy office in Delaware. It claimed a patent-pending status for a proprietary multi-layer vocal interpretation algorithm, her algorithm, tied to an LLC called Monroe Core IP Holdings, an entity she had never heard of. She stared at the screen, heart hammering in her chest. Someone had used her name to file the patent before the company could. It was clean, quiet, nearly invisible. The timing matched the exact week she had been kicked off the design thread. Her first instinct was suspicion. Was this a setup? A legal trap? But the digital signature field, authenticated through biometric log data from an encrypted drive she alone had access to, matched hers. And that's when she remembered the backup she had stored on the portable drive months ago, the one with the automatic remote sync and encrypted IP stamps. That drive had been connected briefly while she ran a file comparison at the co-working space downtown. Her eyes widened. She hadn't filed it, but someone had, under her authority. And whoever did it had access to her secure IP signature and understood that the company was planning to exploit her work without protection. It was a safeguard, a firewall, a line in the sand, and she had no idea who had drawn it for her. Yet, the Monroe Tech annual shareholders meeting was supposed to be the coronation of Brad's legacy, a moment in which the board and its investors would applaud the $180 million licensing deal and discuss expansion strategies into Europe and Asia, with press kits already printed and video crews positioned to capture every angle of corporate triumph. And Brad arrived early, dressed in a tailored navy suit with a new Rolex glinting beneath his cuff, smiling like a man who had not only won the game, but rewritten its rules. The auditorium was packed with analysts, executives, and shareholders clutching glossy packets filled with earnings projections and buzzwords about AI sovereignty and ethical intelligence. Alicia sat near the back of the room, uninvited but present, badge still active thanks to the company's failure to formally process her release. Yet another oversight that would soon come back to haunt them. Brad took the stage first, walking across the platform like it was his private runway, thanking the board and throwing a carefully crafted bone to every contributor who helped build this extraordinary achievement, which, of course, he never bothered to name individually. The crowd applauded. He launched into financial forecasts, product verticals, market adoption strategies, all wrapped in his signature style of overconfidence and faux humility. Then the CFO presented the licensing structure with Virexin Labs, carefully noting that IP rights are secure and uncontested, a phrase that drew Alicia's quiet smile. Then came the final segment, the Q&A, traditionally light, more ceremonial than substantial, until a tall, dark-haired woman in a gray suit stepped forward from the VIP seating row, approached the microphone stand in the center aisle, and said in a crisp, measured tone, "Good afternoon. I'm Emily Harrow of Harrow, Redmond & Associates, here today as legal counsel for one of the company's equity partners. I have a question regarding the legal registration of the algorithm currently in commercialization." The room grew quieter. Brad blinked, the edge of his smile faltering. "Of course," he said, "happy to address any concerns." Emily continued, voice unwavering. Ken Monroe Tech confirmed that it is the sole and uncontested owner of patent MCR VX 1987, filed under the name Multilayer Predictive Voice Interpretation System, and that said patent was properly registered through the World Intellectual Property Organization as of this calendar year. Brad hesitated, then glanced toward his general counsel seated near the side wall. The man shook his head slightly, clearly caught off guard. "We're confident all filings are aligned with our legal strategy," Brad said, trying to pivot. "Our team has managed the IP process in accordance with industry standards. If you have a specific concern, perhaps we can take it offline." Emily raised a single eyebrow. "Unfortunately, that won't suffice. This concern pertains to public claims of ownership made to investors and partners, which, if found to be misrepresented, would constitute material fraud." The temperature in the room dropped. Executives shifted in their seats. One of the VPs whispered something into a phone. Alicia stood up. Heads turned. Conversation stilled. She walked calmly down the center aisle and stepped into the small spotlight that caught her figure with the sharpness of a surgical incision. Her voice, when she spoke, was low but carried like thunder through the silence. "There's no need to go offline," she said. "I can confirm the filing." Emily nodded subtly, then stepped back. Brad stared, lips parted, as Alicia continued. "I am the legal owner of the patent in question. The algorithm referred to in your documents, in your deal with Virexum Labs, and in your public releases was designed, coded, and originally submitted under my authorship. And as of 3 months ago, I filed full ownership rights with WIPO under international IP protections. That filing was accepted, confirmed, and registered under my name, Alicia Monroe." The silence shattered into gasps and murmurs. The CEO stood slowly, visibly shaken. Brad's face paled, all pretense gone. "That's impossible," he said, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Alicia turned to face the shareholders. "The company was aware of this," she said. "Or at least it should have been. My withdrawal from the project was blocked. My name was kept on active rosters to maintain the illusion of diversity and legitimacy. My contributions were systematically buried until they could no longer function without my presence. And when I stepped away, they attempted to file the patent without me, only to discover it had already been done. Properly, legally, internationally." She paused. "By me." Emily stepped forward again, this time holding a folder. "For the record, here are the certified documents of the international filing, as well as the metadata tracing authorship to Ms. Monroe's encrypted design signature. We are submitting these now for shareholder review and board audit." The CEO tried to interject, but the noise had begun, reporters whispering furiously into phones, shareholders standing, board members speaking in low voices with assistants scrambling to verify what had just been dropped on the table, like a lit match in a room full of dry paper. Brad took a step forward, his voice cracking. "Alicia, we worked on that system together." She cut him off with a look that froze him mid-sentence. "You presented what wasn't yours. You locked me out. You tried to replace me. But the system remembers." She tapped the side of her temple. "Every commit, every line of code, every email, logged, encrypted, archived. I knew you'd try this. I just didn't know how fast." She turned back to the crowd. "So let me be clear. I'm not here to sue. Not today. I'm here to reclaim my name, and to notify this board that they've been building a $180 million empire on foundations they do not legally own. Gasps spread like electricity. The fallout from the shareholder meeting was immediate and ferocious, with Monroe Tech's stock freezing mid-trade as news broke across business wires and tech blogs, while headlines flipped overnight from $180 Tech Titan to IP ownership scandal threatens Monroe Tech deal. And inside Alicia's inbox came a flood of media inquiries, some pleading for interviews, others digging for details, but she responded to none of them because her next move wasn't a press tour, it was war. By the following Monday, her legal team, led by Emily Harrow and two partners from a powerhouse civil rights firm, filed a federal lawsuit in the Southern District Court of New York, citing Monroe Tech, Brad Thompson, the CEO Jonathan Myers, and 3 board members as defendants, and listing violations that included intellectual property theft, racial and gender-based employment discrimination, wrongful retaliation, and reputational defamation. The complaint was a 147-page weapon packed with exhibits, including encrypted Git chain timestamps, a full commit history of the algorithm source code under Alicia's username, metadata linking her to the architectural frameworks weeks before Brad's involvement, and, most damning, recorded conversations from internal Zoom meetings, where Brad had made remarks like, "We need someone less polarizing in the demo," and emails where he instructed team leads to strip all personal tags from build. 3.2 We want clean attribution. But what truly turned the case from damning to catastrophic for Monroe Tech was the forensic data audit Alicia's team submitted. A restored archive of deleted internal emails, Slack messages, and flagged calendar records. Retrieved using third-party security tools and corroborated by timestamps stored on a remote mirror Alicia had quietly kept since her earliest suspicions arose. The data revealed a systematic pattern of erasure, intentionally uninviting her to meetings, reassigning her code without documentation, even creating shadowed drafts of proposals she authored to be forwarded under other names. The most devastating exhibit of all, however, was an audio file marked EXHF12, in which Brad was overheard laughing with a senior engineer, saying, "Honestly, no one's going to believe a black girl wrote half this stuff anyway." Within 3 weeks, the lawsuit gained national attention. Civil rights organizations filed amicus briefs. Tech ethics forums exploded in outrage. Fortune and Wired ran back-to-back cover stories titled "The Price of Silence" and "The Woman Behind the Code." Under mounting pressure, the judge expedited the preliminary hearing. Monroe Tech's defense scrambled to claim team ownership and collaborative innovation norms, but Alicia's lawyers were ready, citing WIPO filings, U.S. copyright law, and sealed NDA violations that the company had hoped would never surface. At the hearing, the presiding judge, an Ivy League-educated black woman with a background in digital law, listened intently as Alicia's counsel presented Exhibit H, a reconstructed deployment timeline showing that the current Polaris build, now licensed to Virexen Labs and running in 6 enterprise environments, contained core logic files explicitly registered under Alicia's legal IP. In her preliminary ruling, the judge didn't flinch. This court finds sufficient evidence to determine that the core software in question was filed with an active international patent claim, held by the plaintiff, prior to any corporate registration attempt by Monroe Tech. Further, evidence indicates willful misattribution, code obfuscation, and efforts to suppress or obscure the plaintiff's role in the product lifecycle. Accordingly, the court orders an immediate injunction on all commercial use and distribution of the Polaris algorithm until final adjudication. Gasps filled the courtroom. The tech world stood still. That afternoon, Monroe Tech received a court order signed and sealed, requiring the company to cease all use of the algorithm, suspend their Virexen rollout, and notify all current clients that the software they were running was now under legal embargo. Internally, chaos erupted. Meetings were canceled. Servers were pulled offline. Engineers were placed on legal hold. The company's PR team released a hollow statement: "We respect the legal process and are working toward resolution." But investors weren't fooled. Monroe Tech's stock dropped 34% in a single day. Brad was summoned to an emergency board session. His voice, usually dripping with swagger, cracked as he attempted to frame the situation as a misunderstanding of creative boundaries. But board members, facing fiduciary liability and public embarrassment, weren't buying it. Several demanded his resignation. The CEO, visibly sweating through his collar, tried to play neutral, until Alicia's lawyers sent a follow-up filing adding his own name to a separate civil claim for defamation, citing comments he had made on a podcast weeks prior, praising visionary white leadership in rebalancing diversity-driven overcorrections. Within 48 hours, both Brad and the CEO were suspended pending investigation. Meanwhile, Virexon Labs, facing regulatory scrutiny for deploying unverified software, issued a statement halting their entire Monroe Tech integration and launching an internal review. Alicia, calm amidst the turbulence, spent those days in quiet strategy meetings with her legal team, already preparing the next wave. Arbitration filings, damages assessments, and structured settlements for the clients affected by the court-ordered software blackout. Her office remained the same small workspace on the 19th floor of a co-working tower downtown. No glass walls, no personal assistant, no champagne flutes. Just hard facts, just precision. And through it all, she remained silent in public, not out of fear, but by design. Let them talk. Let the system shake. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. The law was speaking for her now. But she knew one thing was still unfinished. Because even though Monroe Tech had been brought to its knees, and even though Brad's empire had begun to collapse, there was one final reckoning left to deliver. The fallout from the injunction didn't just cripple Monroe Tech's development roadmap. It ignited a corporate firestorm that no PR campaign or shareholder pivot could extinguish. And by Wednesday morning, less than a week after the court's ruling, an all-hands emergency town hall was scheduled for every global division, broadcast via internal channels, with over 500 employees in attendance, from the San Francisco headquarters to satellite offices in Berlin, Singapore, and Cape Town, with the subject line Critical Company Update, Executive Realignments, and Path Forward. Employees logged in from different time zones, some still clutching their coffee mugs, others taking early breaks, just to hear what many suspected, but none had dared to say aloud. And when the stream opened, it showed a stark stage with 2 chairs, one empty, one occupied by the chairwoman of the board, Margot Sinclair, whose usual calm had been replaced with the subtle tightness of someone preparing for controlled demolition. Her voice was precise, clipped, and devoid of corporate ornamentation as she began. This morning, after careful deliberation by the board and in full view of our legal obligations and fiduciary duties, she said, the company has moved to terminate the employment of Brad Thompson, effective immediately, due to violations of intellectual property law, breach of ethical standards, and actions determined to be materially damaging to our reputation and shareholder trust. The screen behind her changed to display Brad's name, title, and a red strike through the word Chief Innovation Officer. There was a beat of silence, and then the chat feature exploded, emojis, stunned reactions, and a flood of finally and about time from every continent. Margot continued, this termination is with cause, and Mr. Thompson will receive no severance, no equity conversion, and has been stripped of any residual project ownership rights. His access to all internal systems was revoked at 7:13 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That detail wasn't just administrative, it was a message. Brad wasn't stepping down. He was being removed. Fully, finally, and without ceremony. The stream cut briefly to a pre-recorded message from Jonathan Myers, the now hollow CEO, who sat behind his executive desk with a background carefully blurred to obscure the chaos undoubtedly unfolding around him. In light of recent developments, he said, voice low and rehearsed, and in alignment with the values we strive to uphold, I have made the difficult decision to resign as Chief Executive Officer of Monroe Tech, effective at the end of this week. He tried to sound reflective, but the lack of apology, the refusal to speak Alicia's name, made it sound more like a damage report than an act of accountability. Within an hour of the broadcast, someone inside the tech ops team leaked the town hall footage to a whistleblower forum, and from there it spread like wildfire, repackaged into TikTok explainers, Twitter threads, and LinkedIn posts titled, When Tech Karma Hits Hard. accumulating millions of views within a single day. News outlets embedded the video in their headlines. The world wasn't just watching, the world was cheering. Meanwhile, Monroe Tech's stock, already staggering from the injunction and the Virexin fallout, cratered further. On Monday, it had dipped 14%. By Thursday afternoon, it was down 48%, triggering automatic reviews by institutional investors and prompting 3 board resignations in less than 72 hours. Hedge funds pulled out. Pension funds froze holdings. One of the company's largest backers, an Emirati firm, issued a public statement that read, "We place our capital in innovation, not exploitation," before selling its entire stake at a loss. Analysts on Bloomberg speculated about a hostile takeover. Others predicted bankruptcy restructuring within a fiscal quarter. Inside the company, panic spread like spores in a sealed room. Departments began freezing budgets. Hiring rounds were canceled. Legal teams worked in round-the-clock shifts, reviewing every contract, every NDA, every licensing line item that had even the faintest touch of Alicia's work. Morale disintegrated. Team leads who had once joked about diversity checkboxes in private threads now found themselves locked out of management meetings. The HR department issued new cultural responsibility guidelines that felt more like confessions than policy. But amid the chaos, Alicia remained silent. Not out of spite, but strategy. Every lawyer she spoke to advised the same: stay measured, stay quiet. Let the collapse echo without her voice needing to push it further. Still, the impact of her presence was undeniable. In every boardroom, her name was now a watermark, visible even when unspoken. In private group chats, junior engineers passed around screenshots of her original code snippets like scripture. She wrote this line, one caption read, "And they tried to erase her." That Friday, Monroe Tech's downtown building, which once bore its logo in bright electric blue, shut off the lights early. In the lobby, where motivational banners used to read "Disrupt to Elevate," someone had taped a single sheet of printer paper to the glass. It said nothing but her name. And somewhere across the city, Alicia sat quietly in the corner booth of a cafe she used to work in during grad school, her laptop open. The same black notebook beside her that had held the earliest sketches of the algorithm they tried to steal. She took a sip of tea, glanced at the stock ticker rolling across her screen, then tapped a new file open. It was titled simply, Next. 1 year after the collapse of Monroe Tech's licensing empire and the public unmasking of the woman they tried to erase, a quiet transformation had begun to ripple through the very corridors where injustice once sat thick in the air. And at the heart of that transformation stood Alicia Monroe, no longer just the woman behind the code, but the founder and executive director of the Elevate Initiative, a nonprofit accelerator designed to support, mentor, and fund Black and brown technologists whose voices had been historically sidelined by systems that valued compliance over brilliance. And on the anniversary of the Polaris injunction, Elevate opened its new headquarters in a refurbished warehouse in Oakland. Its walls covered in murals of historical innovators of color, its rooms filled with laptops, code boot camps, mentorship programs, and startup grants fully funded by a coalition of ethical venture capitalists, one of whom had once sat on Monroe Tech's board before resigning in protest of its actions. Among the dozen volunteers setting up tables for the first cohort's orientation that Monday morning was a man wearing a plain navy t-shirt and faded jeans, his name tag handwritten with a simple Brad Logistics. And though some recognized him immediately, few said anything. Because here he was not a disgraced tech executive, not a pariah looking for redemption, but a man who had shown up every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for the past 5 months without fail, pushing chairs, hauling whiteboards, restocking snack shelves, and doing it all in silence. Brad Thompson had reached out 6 months earlier, not with a press release or a request for forgiveness, but with a one-line email. "If you ever decide to build something new, I want to help carry it this time." Alicia hadn't replied for a week. When she finally did, her message was short: "We're not here for you to be forgiven. We're here for you to be useful." And Brad showed up. Every time. He never asked for a title, never gave an interview, never corrected the whispers when visiting journalists asked, "Is that?" Instead, he cleaned whiteboards after code sessions and listened when young devs told stories that sounded like hers once did. Unseen, unheard, underestimated. Slowly, the tension around him softened. Not into praise, but into presence. People stopped flinching when he entered a room. He was no longer the storm. He was just part of the scaffolding. That fall, Elevate was invited to open the regional TEDx conference in San Francisco with a talk from its founder. Alicia declined, offering instead to let one of her mentor speak about algorithmic bias in hiring software. But the organizers pressed for a closing keynote that addressed the industry's accountability arc. And surprisingly, Alicia said she had someone in mind. The request startled the committee. "Are you sure?" they asked. "I'm sure," she replied. The auditorium was filled with nearly 1,000 attendees, engineers, investors, educators, students. When Brad walked onto the stage that October evening, no spotlight, no fanfare, just a man in a simple blazer carrying the weight of his own shadow. And for the first 10 seconds, he stood there in silence, letting the room breathe the discomfort that had once been his weapon. Then he spoke. "My name is Brad Thompson," he began, "and for most of my career, I thought I was the smartest voice in the room. I thought being loud meant being right. I thought leadership was about visibility, not accountability. And I was wrong." The room held still. A year ago, I stood at the center of a scandal I created. One built on ego, on theft, on the illusion that power makes truth optional. And the woman I tried to silence, Alicia Monroe, didn't just hold the receipts. She held the line. She didn't destroy me. She let the truth do that on its own. What she built instead was a space for all the voices I never heard, because I never listened. And now, I'm learning to listen. He paused, eyes scanning the audience. "Su Kion Geo Keen Tuamu Kwang," he said slowly, repeating the line Alicia had once told a colleague about him in Vietnamese. Pride blinded me, but her justice made me see. The crowd didn't erupt. It didn't cheer. It exhaled, long and heavy, because what they had just witnessed wasn't a speech. It was a reckoning. And when Brad stepped off stage, Alicia was waiting in the wings, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He nodded once. She nodded back. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't reconciliation. It was real. Later that night, back at Elevate HQ, Alicia stood at the edge of a rooftop terrace overlooking the bay. Her mentor gathered around, laughing, sharing ideas, debating how to make decentralized AI fairer. She looked out at the city that once tried to silence her and saw only possibility. Her voice, once cut mid-sentence, now echoed in others. Her algorithm, once stolen, now taught. Her legacy, once erased, now engraved in something far larger than herself. Alicia closed her eyes for a moment and smiled, not because she'd won, but because she'd built a world where no one would have to fight the same battle alone again. If this story struck a chord with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and stay with us for more powerful narratives like this. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from right now? And what moment in this story hit you the hardest? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going.